They're useless, the commander spat, flicking through the reports. A race that can't even defend their own planet. Let them burn. No one argued with him. The Mazar, a species barely capable of interstellar flight, had been under attack for weeks. The Zak Consortium, a coalition of brutal, war-hungry species, swept through their territories like wildfire. Every species that had once pledged support to the Mazar pulled back the moment things got difficult. After all, why risk fleets on a race that couldn't even muster a decent defense? The Galactic Council had been briefed. Some argued for mercy, others for tactical retreats, but most agreed the Mazar weren't worth the trouble, except for one. "Have we heard anything from the humans?" the commander asked, tone dripping with disbelief. The council representative, a relax with too many eyes and not enough sense, sighed. "They're sending aid. Their fleet's already en route." The room went silent for a moment. The commander stared, genuinely baffled. "Aid? To them? Why? They've got nothing to offer. They barely have functioning shields. Apparently, they have an agreement with the Mazar." "An agreement?" The commander laughed, shaking his head. "No one honors agreements like that anymore." The relax glanced at his tablet. "Apparently, the humans do." From the bridge of the Vanguard, Captain Carlos stared at the planet below. It was a wasteland of smoke and fire, the Mazar cities flickering dimly in the distance, their defenses failing one after another. Even from space, the planet looked like it was dying. "Sir," his first officer spoke up, "we're getting reports of Zak ground forces closing in on the capital city." "How many civilians left?" "Too many. If we don't move quickly, they'll be wiped out." Carlos clenched his jaw, watching the tactical display. They were vastly outnumbered, and the Zak ships outgunned them 3-1. But that didn't matter. They hadn't come for an easy fight. "They're relying on us," Carlos muttered. "Prepare all strike teams. We're going in on the ground." The Mazar were barely holding on. Their makeshift barricades crumbled under the pressure of the Zak onslaught. Their soldiers, brave but ill-equipped, fired what little they had at the advancing invaders. The Zak marched forward with brutal efficiency, mowing down the Mazar with ease. In the center of the chaos, Mazar leaders huddled together helpless. And then, out of nowhere, the sky roared. Shuttles marked with the unmistakable insignia of Earth screamed overhead. Human drop pods followed, slamming into the ground with the force of meteors. The Zak barely had time to react before the first humans were on them. Armored, fast, and shockingly coordinated, the human soldiers hit the ground running, scattering the Zak with precise, brutal attacks. The Mazar could only stare in disbelief as the humans did what they had been unable to for weeks. Captain Carlos hit the ground, his boots sinking into the ashen soil around him. His men were already moving, pushing the Zak forces back with ease. The Mazar capital, a city of twisted metal and shattered streets, lay in ruins. But there was still time. If they could hold the line, they might save what was left. "Captain, Zak reinforcements on the way," his communications officer reported. "Good," Carlos grunted. "I was starting to think this was going to be too easy." The Zak were nothing if not relentless. Their hulking forms, twice the size of most humans, barreled forward, their weapons spitting fire. But the humans didn't flinch. They moved as one, each soldier a cog in a well-oiled machine, cutting down the Zak with brutal precision. The Mazar, huddled behind their shattered barricades, watched in awe. They had expected death, defeat, the end of their species. Instead, they saw humans fighting with a tenacity that was as terrifying as it was impressive. One Mazar leader, trembling, approached Carlos. His alien eyes were wide, his voice shaking. "Why? Why did you come?" Carlos glanced at him, reloading his rifle. "We had a deal." "A deal?" The Mazar leader seemed confused. But no one else." "We're not everyone else," Carlos said simply. He turned back to the battle, signaling his men to push forward. The Zak were relentless, but the humans were something else entirely. They didn't have the numbers, but they didn't need them. Every human soldier seemed to fight with a singular purpose, cutting through the enemy with a level of focus that unnerved even the Zak commanders. As the battle raged, Carlos's team pushed deeper into the city. The Zak fell back, but they weren't defeated yet. The humans could win the battle, but the war? That was a different question altogether. "Captain," his first officer said, "we've secured the western flank, but the Zak are regrouping." Carlos nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "We need to hold this position. Reinforcements are still hours away." The Mazar leader, still lingering nearby, looked up at him. You can't hold them off alone. Carlos gave him a sharp look. Watch us. The Mazar leader didn't know what to say. He had expected humans to be like the others. Cold, calculating, unwilling to risk their own lives for a species as insignificant as the Mazar. Instead, he saw something different. He saw humans who didn't turn their backs when things got hard. Humans who fought even when there was no clear reward. For the first time in days, a sliver of hope sparked in his mind. The human advance was steady but grueling. Each street felt like a new battlefield, every corner hiding more Zack ready to ambush. Carlos's armor clanked with each step, dirt and ash mixing with the sweat on his brow. Yet he kept going. His men followed without question. Captain, his comm officer's voice buzzed in his ear. The Zack are regrouping in the industrial sector. They're trying to cut off our escape. Carlos smirked. Let them try. We're not going anywhere. He motioned for his squad to move forward, and they advanced through the ruins of the Mazar capital. Fires raged around them, and the distant sounds of explosions echoed through the broken city. But despite the chaos, the humans remained focused. They reached the industrial district, a mess of twisted metal and collapsed structures. The Zack had entrenched themselves here. Their heavy artillery pointed toward the city's few remaining strongholds. If they weren't stopped, the capital would fall for sure. Carlos studied the layout. It was a death trap, no doubt, but they didn't have the luxury of waiting. We'll hit them hard and fast. No time to second guess. Carlos's voice was firm, and his men nodded without hesitation. The first volley from the human side was like a thunderclap. Rockets screamed toward the Zack positions, detonating with brutal efficiency. Zack soldiers scrambled to respond, but the humans were already on the move. They hit the entrenched enemy lines with an almost reckless speed, tearing through the Zack's defensive positions as if they were nothing. Carlos was in the thick of it, his rifle barking in his hands as he cut down the towering Zack, one after another. Around him, his men moved like ghosts, weaving through the enemy lines, creating chaos wherever they went. The Zack fought back hard, but it was clear they hadn't expected this kind of resistance. Their tactics were based on overwhelming their enemies with brute force, but the humans didn't play by those rules. They were faster, more adaptable, and far more stubborn than the Zack had anticipated. A blast went off nearby, shaking the ground beneath Carlos's feet. He stumbled but quickly regained his balance, firing another round into the chest of a charging Zack. The alien collapsed with a guttural growl, its massive body hitting the ground with a heavy thud. "Captain," one of his men called out, "they're pulling back." Carlos didn't relax. He knew the Zack weren't retreating. They were regrouping, preparing for a counterattack. He glanced at the sky, where the smoke from the city's fires had darkened the horizon. They had made progress, but the battle was far from over. "We need to push forward," Carlos ordered. "We can't give them time to reorganize." The humans moved swiftly, pressing the advantage. But as they advanced deeper into the industrial sector, the resistance grew fiercer. Zack soldiers began to flood the area, pouring out of hidden bunkers and underground tunnels. It was becoming clear that the Zack had been preparing for a prolonged battle here, and they were throwing everything they had into it. Carlos's squad took cover behind a collapsed structure as a hail of plasma fire rained down on them. The Zack were dug in deep now, and their heavy artillery was making it difficult to advance. "We're pinned," one of Carlos's men shouted, ducking as a nearby wall was blown apart. Carlos gritted his teeth. They couldn't afford to be bogged down here, not with the Zack so close to breaking through to the city's last defenses. "Rockets! Now!" Carlos barked. The humans responded instantly, launching another volley of rockets into the Zack's fortified positions. The explosion shook the ground, sending debris flying in every direction. The Zack artillery fire lessened, but Carlos knew it wouldn't be enough to win the battle. "We're going in," he said, standing up from behind cover. His men followed without hesitation, charging toward the enemy lines despite the risks. They leapt over rubble and dodged incoming fire, their movements precise and calculated. The Zack, despite their superior numbers, were caught off guard by the sheer aggression of the human assault. As they reached the Zack's fortified position, the fighting became brutal. The humans engaged the Zack in close-quarters combat, using their speed and agility to outmaneuver the larger aliens. The air was thick with the sounds of battle, gunfire, explosions, and the growls of the Zak as they tried in vain to push back the human invaders. Carlos fought alongside his men, his rifle now replaced with a combat blade as he engaged the Zak head-on. He ducked beneath a swing from a massive Zak warrior, driving his blade upward into the alien's chest. The Zak roared in pain, collapsing to the ground as Carlos pulled the blade free. The battle was chaos, but the humans fought with an unshakable focus. They didn't stop, didn't hesitate, and slowly but surely, they began to turn the tide. The Zak lines began to falter. Their once unbreakable formations crumbled under the relentless human assault. The aliens, who thrived on overwhelming power and fear, were facing something they couldn't understand. Defiance that refused to yield, no matter the odds. Carlos led his squad deeper into the industrial sector, where the Zak command center was located. This was their nerve center for the assault on the city, a massive, fortress-like structure bristling with heavy weaponry and guarded by an elite contingent of Zak warriors. If they could take it down, the rest of the Zak forces would collapse into disarray. But the cost of getting there was steep. The humans had suffered losses, good men and women who had given everything to hold the line. Each death weighed heavily on Carlos, but he didn't have time to mourn. The mission came first. "Captain, we've got eyes on the command center," one of his scouts reported over the comms. "It's fortified as hell. No way we're getting close without taking heavy fire." Carlos cursed under his breath. They needed a plan, and fast. "Options?" he asked, looking around at his squad. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Vega, spoke up. "We could try to flank them, use the collapsed structures to get in closer. It's risky, but it might be our best shot." Carlos nodded. "Do it. Split into 2 teams. Vega, you take Alpha Squad and hit them from the east. Bravo's with me. We'll draw their fire from the front." The humans moved quickly, splitting up and taking their positions. Carlos's team crept through the ruins, using the rubble for cover as they approached the Zak fortress. The air was tense, every sound amplified by the silence that hung over the battlefield. "Ready," Vega's voice crackled over the comms. "On your signal." Carlos took a deep breath. "Go." The humans struck with surgical precision. Vega's squad launched an assault from the east, drawing the attention of the Zak defenders. Plasma fire lit up the night as the Zak turned their weapons toward the new threat. Meanwhile, Carlos and his team moved in from the front, using the distraction to close the distance. Suppressing fire, Carlos shouted, and his team unleashed a hail of bullets and rockets at the fortress's defenses. The Zak were momentarily overwhelmed, their attention split between the 2 human squads. It was the opening they needed. Carlos charged forward, leading his team into the heart of the enemy position. The Zak fought back with everything they had, but the humans were relentless. They moved with a precision that bordered on ruthlessness, exploiting every weakness in the Zak defenses. As they breached the outer perimeter of the fortress, the fighting became even more intense. The Zak elites, massive warriors clad in heavy armor, engaged the humans in brutal close combat. Carlos found himself face to face with one of the towering aliens, its glowing eyes filled with rage. The Zak swung a massive energy blade, but Carlos ducked beneath his strike and drove his combat knife into a weak point in the alien's armor. The Zak roared in pain, but Carlos didn't stop. He grabbed the alien's dropped blade and used it to deliver the killing blow. "Captain, the command center's in sight." Vega's voice came over the comms. "We've breached their secondary defenses." "Good work," Carlos replied. "Push forward. We'll meet you there." The humans converged on the command center, their combined assault overwhelming the remaining Zak defenders. The fortress's walls crumbled under the relentless barrage, and the humans stormed inside. Carlos led the charge, his rifle at the ready. The interior of the command center was a maze of corridors and rooms, but the humans moved with purpose, cutting down any Zak they encountered. Finally, they reached the central control room, a massive chamber filled with alien technology and staffed by high-ranking Zak officers. "Clear the room," Carlos ordered. His team swept in, taking out the Zak officers with brutal efficiency. Within moments, the chamber was theirs. Carlos approached the control console, studying the alien interface. "Vega, get our tech specialist in here. I want this place rigged to blow." "Yes, sir," Vega replied. As the team worked to plant explosives throughout the command center, Carlos took a moment to catch his breath. The battle wasn't over, but they had dealt the Zak a critical blow. Without their command center, the Zak forces in the city would be in complete disarray. Captain, Vega said, walking up to him. Explosives are set. We've got 5 minutes before this place goes up. Understood, Carlos replied. Let's move. The humans retreated from the fortress, covering each other as they made their way back through the ruins. As they reached a safe distance, a massive explosion shook the ground, lighting up the night sky. The Zack command center was gone. Cheers erupted from the human comms, but Carlos remained focused. This isn't over, he said. The Zack will regroup. We need to be ready. But as he looked around at his squad, bloodied, battered, but still standing, he felt a surge of pride. They had done the impossible. They had stood against the might of the Zack and won. For now, the city was safe. But Carlos knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. And as long as humanity stood united, he was ready to fight.